Before we begin, if you enjoy emotional stories like this, consider subscribing. Let's get into it. A year after the divorce, my life had finally gone quiet. Just quiet in the way that only comes after something breaks and you survive it. I was sitting alone in a coffee shop I'd never gone to while I was married. That detail mattered more than it should have. New places had become my way of measuring progress. If a space held no memory of her, I could breathe easier inside it. The shop smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon. A low hum of conversation floated through the room, punctuated by the hiss of a milk steamer and the scrape of chairs against tile. Outside, traffic moved slowly, trapped between red lights and afternoon impatience. I wasn't working. I wasn't waiting for anyone. That alone felt like an achievement. My phone rested face down on the table beside my coffee. I hadn't checked it in nearly an hour. No reason to. Anyone who needed me knew where to find me now. Everyone else had faded into the background where they belonged. I remember thinking, briefly, almost idly, that this must be what stability feels like. Not excitement, not happiness, just the absence of dread. Then the phone vibrated. Once, short, sharp, intentional. I didn't reach for it. Something in my chest tightened, the way it does right before a memory resurfaces. The vibration hadn't been loud, but it carried weight. Messages like that usually did. I turned the phone over. Her name filled the screen. Lauren. I stared at it longer than I meant to. A year was long enough for a name to lose its grip on you, long enough for the sound of it to dull. Seeing it now felt like opening a drawer I hadn't touched since moving out of the house we once shared. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hope. What I felt was suspicion. People don't stay silent for a year and then reach out without a reason. They don't suddenly remember your existence unless something in their world has gone wrong. I locked the phone again, took a sip of coffee. Across the room, a couple laughed quietly over a shared pastry. At the counter, a woman argued with the barista about almond milk. Life moved on without acknowledging the small disruption at my table. I let it, because whatever Lauren wanted, it had already missed its window. I waited until I stepped outside before opening the message. Cold air hit my face, sharp enough to wake me fully. I leaned against the brick wall beside the shop, one shoulder pressed into the rough surface, and unlocked my phone. The message loaded instantly. It was short, too short for someone who hadn't spoken to me in a year. No greeting, no easing in, no pretending this was casual. The words felt hurried, like they'd been typed without stopping to reread them. There was tension in the spacing, in the punctuation, in the absence of anything resembling courtesy. I read it once, then again. Something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong that asked for closure or comfort. This felt urgent in a way that suggested consequences, legal, personal, or both. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and pushed off the wall. A car horn blared somewhere down the street. Someone cursed at a driver who didn't move fast enough when the light changed. The city continued its rhythm, indifferent to whatever storm was building inside a message I hadn't answered. As I walked, another vibration buzzed against my thigh. I stopped mid-step, pulled the phone out again. Another message, shorter than the first, more desperate. I didn't open it. My thumb hovered over the screen as a familiar instinct tried to resurface. The urge to respond quickly, to manage the situation, to smooth things over before they escalated. That instinct belonged to an earlier version of me. The man who used to rush toward problems that weren't his to solve. I kept walking. By the time I reached my car, the phone vibrated again. This time, I opened the message immediately. The panic was impossible to miss now. Whatever confidence Lauren once had was gone. The tone carried something raw and unstable beneath the words. Fear. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, phone resting against the steering wheel. My reflection stared back at me through the windshield. Older, leaner, steadier than the man she'd left behind. I thought about the last conversation we'd had. The courthouse hallway, neutral expressions, carefully chosen words. She'd been calm then, detached, certain. Seeing her unravel now felt disorienting. I didn't respond right away. Minutes passed, then more. I watched as another message appeared, then another. each one more frantic than the last. People reveal themselves when they panic, not through what they say, but through how quickly they say it. Lauren had always been measured. Seeing her lose that control told me everything I needed to know. Something from the past had resurfaced, something she thought was buried. I exhaled slowly and typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. I wasn't interested in punishing her. I wasn't interested in reopening wounds. I just wasn't willing to lie about where my life stood now. I typed a final message. Short, honest, unembellished. Then I sent it. The screen went still. No reply. No typing bubble. Nothing. I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat and started the engine. As I pulled into traffic, one thought settled into place with unsettling clarity. Whatever Lauren was afraid of, it had already caught up to her, and she wasn't reaching out because she missed me. She was reaching out because she'd realized, too late, that I was no longer waiting where she left me. The truth is, the marriage didn't collapse all at once. It weakened first, slowly, quietly, in ways that were easy to dismiss when you still believed effort could fix anything. The year before the divorce, my life revolved around one thing: keeping my company alive. It wasn't some reckless gamble. It was something I'd spent years building. Late nights, missed weekends, borrowed patience. The kind of work that doesn't look glamorous from the outside, but consumes everything once you're inside it. Lauren knew that when we got married. She used to say she admired it. But admiration changes when the payoff takes longer than expected. At first, the shift was subtle. She stopped asking questions about my day. Conversations turned shorter, less curious. When I talked about investors or deadlines, her eyes drifted elsewhere. Her phone, the TV, the window. I told myself it was stress. Everyone gets tired. Everyone has seasons. Then came the comments. Small ones. Easy to laugh off if you weren't paying attention. You've been saying just a few more months for a while now. You're always working, but nothing seems to be changing. I just thought by now we'd be further. Each sentence landed softly. None of them sounded cruel on their own. Together they carried a message I didn't want to hear. She was losing faith, not just in the business, in me. Around that time, my business partner started coming around the apartment more often. Caleb. He and I had built the company together from the ground up. Same vision, same grind. At least that's what I believed then. He'd stop by under the excuse of meetings that needed to be in person. He stayed for dinner, laughed easily with Lauren, too easily. I noticed how she relaxed around him in ways she didn't around me anymore. How conversations flowed when I left the room. How silence followed when I returned. Once, late at night, I stepped into the kitchen and found them talking in low voices. Nothing inappropriate, nothing obvious. But the way they stopped when they noticed me, that lingered. I didn't accuse, I didn't confront. I trusted the people I loved. That was my first mistake. The end came without drama, no screaming, no thrown objects, no final argument that people imagine when they hear the word divorce. Lauren waited until the timing favored her. The company was struggling. Funding had stalled. Every decision felt heavier than the last. I came home one evening already exhausted, mentally rehearsing how I'd explain the latest setback. She was standing in the living room when I walked in, not pacing, not crying, packing. Her suitcase lay open on the couch, clothes folded with care, like she was preparing for a trip she'd been planning for a while. I remember thinking, briefly, absurdly, that she'd finally decided to take that vacation she kept hinting at. Then she spoke. I can't do this anymore. Her voice was steady, practiced. I asked what she meant, though I already knew. She talked about feeling invisible, about uncertainty, about needing stability in her life. She said the words calmly, like she'd rehearsed them in her head until they lost their sharp edges. I told her we were in a rough season. She said seasons shouldn't last this long. I reminded her of the years I'd supported her dreams, the sacrifices we'd made together. She said she appreciated that, but appreciation wasn't enough anymore. That was the moment I realized she'd already left. Emotionally, she'd been gone for months. The suitcase was just logistics. When I asked if there was someone else, she hesitated for half a second too long. Not long enough to confess. long enough to confirm. She didn't deny it outright. She redirected, said it wasn't about anyone else. It was about her happiness. That was the line she used to exit the conversation. I didn't beg. I didn't block the door. I stood there and watched her zip the suitcase closed. She hugged me quickly before leaving, a gesture that felt more like closure than comfort. The door clicked shut behind her. The apartment felt different immediately, not empty, exposed. Within weeks, the divorce moved faster than I expected. She wanted it clean, efficient, final. I gave her the house, the car, anything she asked for except the company. That was the only thing I refused to let go of. She agreed too quickly. At the time, I thought it was mercy. I didn't yet understand it was strategy. By the time the papers were signed, my marriage was over, my business was barely standing, and two people I trusted had quietly repositioned themselves on the other side of my life. I just hadn't connected the dots yet, but I would. Soon. After the divorce, I learned how thin a life can become without actually falling apart. I wasn't homeless. I wasn't helpless. But I was floating. The apartment I moved into felt temporary in a way I couldn't explain. The furniture didn't quite fit the space. The walls stayed bare longer than they should have. Everything felt like it could be packed up quickly if needed. That should have been my first warning. The business was still alive technically, but barely. Clients hesitated. Calls went unanswered. Every morning started with a calculation. What needed to be handled today so tomorrow could exist at all? I slept lightly, ate irregularly, worked constantly. Friends checked in at first, then less often. Life didn't pause for my rebuild. Lauren never reached out during that time, not once. The first message came from her sister, Hannah. It arrived late one evening while I was staring at my laptop, pretending numbers would rearrange themselves if I looked long enough. Hey, I don't know if this is a good idea, but I heard things have been rough. If you need a place to sit, talk, or just breathe for a bit, I'm around. I read it twice. Then a third time. Hannah and I had never been close. Cordial, yes. Familiar by proximity. We'd shared holidays, birthdays, long dinners where conversation drifted between polite and forgettable. She was quieter than Lauren, observant, the kind of person who listened longer than she spoke. I'd always assumed she saw me through her sister's lens. Apparently I was wrong. I didn't reply that night. Something about accepting help felt like admitting failure. Pride does that. It convinces you isolation is strength. By the next afternoon, exhaustion made the decision for me. I could use a coffee, I typed back, if that's still okay. Her reply came quickly. Anytime. I'll be at the place on Maple around 6. She didn't ask questions. That mattered. The cafe was small, dimly lit, the kind of place where people lingered because no one rushed them out. Hannah was already there when I arrived, seated near the window, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone untouched. She stood when she saw me, hesitated, then smiled. It wasn't forced, just careful. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said. Neither was I. She laughed softly at that, and the tension eased just enough for us to sit. We talked about nothing important at first. Work, traffic, the strange way time distorts when routines disappear. She didn't mention Lauren, didn't ask about the divorce, let silence exist without filling it. Eventually she said, "You look tired." Not accusatory, not pitying, just factual. "I am," I admitted. She nodded once. That tracks. Something about her tone, steady, grounded, made it easier to breathe. When we stood to leave, she paused, then said, "If you ever need somewhere quiet to work for a few hours, my place is usually empty during the day." No obligation, no expectation, just an open door. I didn't realize it then, but that was the moment things began to shift. I didn't move into Hannah's life. I stepped into the edges of it. At first it was practical, a desk that wasn't cluttered, reliable internet, a place that didn't carry the weight of decisions gone wrong. She went to work in the mornings. I stayed behind with my laptop in the quiet. Sometimes she left notes on the counter. Coffee's in the cabinet. Don't forget to eat something. Nothing intrusive, nothing personal, just presence. Weeks passed. We settled into an unspoken rhythm. I learned that she drank tea when stressed and coffee when calm, that she read before bed every night, even if it was only a few pages, that she hated clutter but never commented on it directly. She just fixed it. She learned that I paced when thinking, that I stopped working only when physically reminded to. That silence didn't make me uncomfortable anymore, but conversation still did sometimes. There was no flirtation, no tension I could point to, just a sense of safety that felt unfamiliar after months of instability. One night, after a long call that ended badly, I closed my laptop harder than necessary. The sound echoed in the room. Hannah looked up from the couch. "Bad news?" "Worse than yesterday," I said. She nodded, waited. "Do you want advice?" she asked, "or company?" The question caught me off guard. "Company," I said after a moment. She didn't offer encouragement, didn't try to solve anything. She just sat there. That was enough. The first time I stayed the night, it wasn't planned. A storm rolled in late, heavy rain pounding against the windows. I'd worked straight through dinner without realizing it. Hannah noticed, handed me a plate without comment. Later, when the rain refused to let up, she gestured toward the guest room. "You don't have to drive," she said. I hesitated, then nodded. The room was simple, clean, a lamp left on low, fresh sheets. I slept deeply for the first time in months. Nothing changed the next morning, and somehow that meant everything. Time does strange things when trust enters the room. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. The business stabilized slowly, not dramatically, just enough to breathe. One client returned, then another. A contract came through that didn't fix everything but proved survival was possible. Hannah noticed before I did. "You're standing differently," she said one evening. "What does that mean?" "You don't look like you're bracing anymore." I thought about that long after she went to bed. The realization settled quietly. She had seen me at my lowest and never tried to reshape me. She didn't compare me to who I used to be. She just accepted who I was becoming. The shift happened one night without ceremony. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, a movie playing neither of us was watching. I leaned back. She leaned in. At some point, our shoulders touched. Neither of us moved away. I felt it then. Clear, unmistakable. Not desire, connection. The kind that forms when nothing is demanded. I didn't act on it. Neither did she. But from that moment on, the space between us changed. Something unspoken settled there. And somewhere else, far beyond that quiet apartment, a woman who thought she'd already moved on began to realize she might have left something unfinished behind. By the time I replied to Lauren, I already knew something important. Whatever she was afraid of, it wasn't emotional. It was practical. Fear that comes from guilt carries a different weight. It rushes, it leaks, it shows itself in repetition and urgency, not longing. Her messages had followed that pattern perfectly. I waited until evening, not as a tactic, as a test. If what she needed was comfort, she would slow down. If what she needed was control, she wouldn't. My phone vibrated 3 more times before sunset, each message shorter than the last, each one stripped of pleasantries, leaving only pressure. I didn't read them all. I typed instead, a single sentence. Nothing defensive, nothing cruel, just the truth. I told her I wasn't available. I told her I was with Hannah. I didn't dress it up. I didn't soften it. I sent it and set the phone face down. For a long moment, nothing happened. Hannah was in the kitchen moving quietly, unaware of the line that had just been crossed somewhere else. I watched her from the couch. How calm she looked, how present. There was no drama in her movements, no tension in her shoulders. This was my life now, and I wasn't hiding it. The phone lit up, then vibrated, then lit up again. Lauren didn't respond with words at first. She called. I let it ring. The second call came seconds later. I declined it. When the third came, I stood up and walked onto the balcony before answering. Not to escape Hannah, but to keep my voice steady. "Brandon," Lauren said the moment I picked up. My name came out fast, clipped, like she was afraid I'd hang up mid-syllable. "Is this a joke?" "No." Silence. Then, "You're saying that to hurt me?" "I'm saying it because it's true." Her breathing changed, shortened, sharper. "That's not okay," she said. "That crosses a line." I leaned against the railing, the city lights blinking on below me. "You crossed your line a year ago. That's different." It always is, I thought, to the person who left. "You don't get to do this," she said. "You don't get to pull her into this." "I didn't pull anyone," I replied. "She stayed." Another silence, this one heavier. "This is about revenge," Lauren said finally. "You're trying to get back at me." "If that were true," I said, "I would have answered your first message." Her breath hitched. "You don't understand what's happening," she said. "That's the first honest thing you've said." The words landed harder than I expected. I felt it in the way she stopped speaking, in the pause that stretched long enough to expose everything she'd been trying to outrun. "Please," she said quietly, "we need to talk. In person." I looked back through the glass doors. Hannah was setting 2 mugs on the table. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Brandon," Lauren said, and now her voice broke. "You don't know what he did." There it was, the first crack in the wall. "He?" I repeated. She stopped. I waited, and when she spoke again, her words tumbled out without structure. "You don't know how bad it is," she said. "You don't know what Caleb took, or how, or what he used." The city felt very far away all of a sudden. "You should have told me this a year ago," I said. "I couldn't," she replied. "I didn't know everything then, and by the time I did, it was too late." I closed my eyes. Fear had driven her away. Guilt had chased her back. Neither had anything to do with love. We met 2 days later. Not because I owed her closure, because I wanted clarity. Lauren arrived early. I could tell by the way she stood when I walked in. Straight-backed, tense, already braced for impact. She looked thinner than I remembered, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. We didn't hug. We sat across from each other like strangers with shared history. "I didn't come to ask you to come back," she said before I could speak. "I know that door is closed." I waited. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around her cup. "Caleb didn't just leave the company." I stayed silent. "He was already siphoning things out before he walked away. Client lists, prototypes, investor conversations." My jaw tightened. "He used me," she continued. "I was still married to you, still close enough to know things." I didn't see it at first. I thought he was venting, helping, looking for ways to fix what you couldn't. There it was, the story she'd told herself to make the betrayal survivable. "He created another firm," she said, quietly, "parallel to yours. He used your work to pitch it." I felt something settle in my chest, not anger, confirmation. "Why tell me now?" I asked. She swallowed. "Because he's being investigated. One of his new partners found out where the material came from. There are lawyers involved." "And you're scared," I said. "Yes." "Of what?" I asked. She met my eyes. "That you'll find out I knew more than I admitted." The honesty landed late, but clean. I exhaled slowly. "You didn't panic because you missed me." "No. You panicked because the truth was about to catch up to you." Her shoulders dropped. "Yes." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said the thing I hadn't expected. "When I heard you were with Hannah, I realized something." I didn't respond. "She stayed," Lauren said. "Didn't she?" I looked at her. "She did." Lauren nodded, tears finally breaking free. "I left when you were struggling. She stepped in when there was nothing left to step into." "That's the difference," I said. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I thought I was choosing stability, but I chose fear." "And fear always charges interest," I replied. She laughed once, hollow. "You always said that." We stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "I don't expect forgiveness." "You shouldn't," I said gently. She nodded. "I hope she treats you well." "She already has." Lauren walked away without looking back. This time, it wasn't defiance. It was understanding. And as I stepped back into the street, one truth stood clear above the rest. She hadn't come back because she loved me. She came back because the story she'd been hiding from was about to be told, with or without her permission. The truth didn't explode. It unfolded. slowly, methodically, with paperwork, timelines, and signatures that carried more weight than any apology ever could. The investigation into Caleb's new company went public a month after my meeting with Lauren. Not because I pushed it, but because secrets that involve money and ownership never stay buried long. Someone always follows the trail when the numbers stop adding up. I received the call on a Thursday morning, a number I didn't recognize. A law firm representing a group of investors who wanted to know how much of my original work had been taken, duplicated, or repurposed without consent. They already knew the answer. They just needed me to confirm it. I sat at my desk, phone pressed to my ear, listening as dates and documents were read back to me. Prototypes I remembered building. Proposals I remembered presenting. Concepts that had once felt fragile and unfinished now sat on someone else's letterhead. By the time the call ended, my hands were steady. That surprised me. There was a version of this story where rage consumed everything, where I tore open old wounds and demanded justice with my voice raised and my hands shaking. That version didn't exist anymore. What replaced it was clarity. I provided what they asked for: emails, files, time-stamped drafts. Everything I'd kept not out of paranoia, but habit. Weeks later, Caleb reached out. Not directly, through his attorney. The message was careful, controlled, polite. He denied intent, claimed misunderstanding, offered settlement. I didn't respond. My lawyer did. The case moved forward without spectacle, without drama, without the satisfaction of seeing someone publicly unravel. Instead, it ended the way most truths do, quietly. Caleb's company dissolved within the year. Licensing issues followed, restrictions, financial consequences that wouldn't make headlines, but would follow him wherever he tried to start again. Lauren was in charge. She wasn't innocent either. Her name appeared in emails, conversations, acknowledgments she couldn't explain away. She reached out once more, after everything was finalized. I didn't reply. Accountability doesn't always require confrontation. Sometimes it just requires distance. Hannah never asked for details. She noticed the change, though. The way I slept longer. The way my shoulders loosened. The way I laughed without checking myself afterward. One evening, we sat on the balcony as the city cooled around us, lights flickering on one by one. She handed me a mug and rested her head against my shoulder without comment. "I think something heavy lifted," she said. It did. She didn't ask what. That was her gift. The business recovered slowly. Not dramatically, not miraculously, just steadily. Clients returned. New ones arrived through referrals, not hype. The kind of growth that doesn't announce itself, but sustains itself. One night, months later, we talked about the past. Not in detail, just enough to acknowledge it. "I used to think staying meant weakness," I said. "That leaving was strength." Hannah smiled softly. "Sometimes staying is just choosing not to abandon yourself." I thought about Lauren then, not with anger, with understanding. She'd chosen escape over uncertainty, control over faith, fear over patience. I had chosen differently, and that choice had cost me almost everything before giving me something better. The proposal happened without witnesses, no restaurant, no audience, no performance. Just us sitting on the floor of the apartment we now shared, surrounded by boxes we hadn't unpacked yet because we liked knowing we were still building something. I didn't kneel, I just asked. She answered without hesitation. The ring was simple. The promise wasn't. On the morning of our wedding, I didn't think about the past, not the divorce, not the betrayal, not the panicked text that had started this final chapter. I thought about the stillness, about the person beside me who had seen me stripped of everything and never tried to reshape me into something safer. Love, I learned, doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't rush in with urgency or demand proof. It sits beside you while the noise burns itself out. Later that evening, as guests drifted away and the night grew quiet, Hannah leaned into me and said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if she hadn't reached out?" I thought about it, then shook my head. "No," I said, "because she didn't change anything." She smiled. "Good." The past had finally settled into its proper place, behind me, and the life ahead didn't need to explain itself to anyone. Do you think Hannah crossed a line? Or did she simply stay when everyone else walked away? Which side are you on, and why? Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.